Good afternoon. George Hepworth, Grover Park Consulting. Let's build Mike's mobile library. In this session, we're going to take a closer look at the AddColumns and ShowColumns functions in conjunction with building a collection for our Power Apps application. In a previous session, I used them in a manner that I thought was appropriate. Further testing has indicated that I had made some invalid assumptions, and today I'm going to revisit and correct those invalid assumptions. Let's get started. Once again, we're back in the development environment for our Power Apps applications in my Office or my Microsoft 365 account. I created a new little Power Apps application in order to demonstrate the issues that I wanted to cover here, to keep it separate from the work we're doing with Mike's mobile library, make it a little bit easier to see. As you can see, I set it up by creating a one-screen application with two galleries. The gallery on the left is for the raw data coming from a table. The gallery on the right is for a collection with ShowColumns applied for items coming from a collection. Let's look at the data which is being used here. This is the table that we're using for our example. It's called Table Creator. It has 4 fields in the working set. Creator ID, which is the ID field, the primary key field. Creator first name, middle name, and last name. Creator ID was originally generated when the SharePoint list was created as ID, and as we've talked about in previous sessions, I aliased it to reflect the fact that it comes from the creator table or creator ID. Let's go back and look at this table from the point of view of the fields in it. Looking at settings, we see that the fields, the ones that we're looking for are the creator first name, creator last name, creator middle name, but as we've come to expect, SharePoint supplies several of its own auto-generated fields, and it doesn't display ID because it assumes that we're never going to look at that. It's not important to us or something. I don't know why they never show it here. If I look at the views, however, I can see in more detail what is really there. We'll select the All Items view, and now we see all of the items in our table. There's the Creator ID, which was originally ID, renamed with an alias of Creator ID. And all of the other fields that are created internally, but not necessarily exposed through the list as we work with it in our Power Apps application. I mainly wanted to point out that these are all here. They're internal fields generated by default, and every SharePoint list is going to have some or all of these fields. Click OK to go back, and we'll close this out. Actually, I think I'll leave it open in case we want to look at it again. Let's go back and look at it here. There's that SharePoint list. We can look at the data by using the Edit Data option off the 3 little dots, the More button. And here's that same data creator that we just looked at. Okay, let's go back. Now, the way I set this up was I wanted to illustrate how the ShowColumns and DropDolumns and AddColumns were actually working. I was mistaken in my assumption about how it worked, and I'll walk through that and hopefully explain all those issues with you. I'm going to look at the onStart action first. What I did was I created a collection called Call Creator. And I did that by the mechanism we used in our Mike's Mobile Library Development app in the previous session. We use clear collect or collect along with the ShowColumns option to generate a collection. I wanted to point out here that even though we're only telling this collection, I want to show columns ID and creator first name, it actually creates the collection with not only those fields, but all of the other fields in that list. This is an important one. We've talked about this several times. It exposes the primary key field as its internal name ID, and when I ask for it in my collection, I have to refer to it as ID. If I try to ask for that field by the alias, I generate an error. Even though when we looked at the view presents it with the alias creator ID, but Power Apps is seeing only that internal ID. If I set this back the way it was so it will run properly, and comment out that, then we get a valid, and I can run it again. And now I've reset my collection by clearing it out and refilling it with those records. We'll take one more look here at this table that's generated by doing that. We have all of the fields, including the one that I asked for, the two that I asked for, plus all the others. Now I'm going to do something else. Give me a second to do a little bit of housekeeping. I am going to comment this option out. And uncomment this option. Now, this option is going to generate the same collection called creator, but it's only going to do so with the table itself or the SharePoint list itself. I'm not using ShowColumns to try to add or limit the available columns in that collection. We'll run this one more time. Look at the table that it generates. And again, you can see all of the same fields are returned. So my collection, even though I tried to use ShowColumns to limit the fields that made it into the collection, it has no impact on the collection itself. ShowColumns and AddColumns and DropDolumns are only going to be effective when we try to use this collection as the items in a control on a form or in a gallery. Let me repeat that. When we generate the collection, as nearly as I can tell, this is based on my experience in working on this application and this little demo here. Make that caveat, this is my experience. Creating a collection on a SharePoint list is not impacted by whether I use ShowColumns, AddColumns, DropDolumns. They're all going to come in. So I have two galleries now. The gallery on the left is the raw table, and if we select it, the items in that are simply creator. There's no filtering, no sorting, nothing. It's just the raw table, and it again shows all of the fields in that SharePoint list as being available. Go away. This gallery on the right, which is the ShowColumns, is based on the collection we created. If I click on Call Create here, again, we get the full impact of all of the fields showing up in our table. But I'm going to limit the columns available in the items for this gallery by showing me only ID, creator first name, and creator last name. At this outer level, when I impose the ShowColumns function on that collection. Now it shows my original intent was to show the ID and whatever fields I wanted to include only and no others. And that's exactly what happens for the items in this gallery. I'm getting ID, first name, and last name. And we can further verify that by looking at this text, the text in this label, this item created, and that's the date the item was created. If I uncomment the equivalent here, it throws an error because in this gallery with the ShowColumns filtered collection, created is not available. Even though if I look again at the collection itself, it's available in the collection, despite the fact that I created that collection with the ShowColumns option. I'm going to run that again here just to verify that that's what happened. Give me a second to set this up, and then I will talk through it again more carefully. Uncomment this, and have to set this down a row and uncomment. Oh, I want that one there, but this one I want down. Okay. And I have to comment this one out. Okay. And I want the comma. What am I missing, George? ShowColumns. Clear collect. Generating ID. Oh, I've got ID twice. All right. So now, if I run OnStart, I'm running OnStart on the version that does generate ShowColumns, or does generate the collection using ShowColumns, which has no impact on the actual fields that are returned into that collection. And I'm still seeing an error, which is this one here. However, if I apply ShowColumns here in the items, oops, excuse me a second, I need to navigate around a little more carefully. I want to get to this collection, the items. When I apply ShowColumns at this point on column creator, even though the collection contains all of the fields, this limits it to those that I want to see. So this is the approach that I really intended to use. I thought I was using, but as it turns out, I was missing this crucial fact that ShowColumns, and the same is true for AddColumns and DropDolumns, is only impactful, or only has an impact when we're taking that collection and putting it into an item source or some other place we're actually going to use that collection in the Power Apps somewhere. Okay, and now we've got rid of our error. So as you can see from this little demonstration, I'm going to have to go back to my development copy of Mike's Mobile Library, fix this all up, reset my collections, reflecting the fact that I now understand this a little bit better. And eventually that will be transferred back into the production version at some point. Let me pause and just quickly talk about this in terms of how this experience reflects, I think, on the overall experience of learning how to work with Power Apps coming from an Access background. I think as Access developers, we spend a great deal of time figuring things out. One of the famous statements that used to go around in the Access MVP world was, how hard could it be? I'll try anything. All I have to do is figure it out. How hard can it be? And so that spirit has driven a lot of what I've done, and I think a lot of what many Access developers do. In this case, I went down the wrong path originally because I thought, well, I will just go ahead and do it, and that will work. And as it turns out, that was a mistake. I had to back up, take a fresh run at it, learn a little bit more, slow down, think through things more carefully. And now I think I have a much better understanding. I believe that is a lesson that we all can take, not just me, but every Access developer working with a new technology like Power Apps. Take your time, figure out how it works, and then don't settle. Go on, take the next step, which is learn why it works, what you have missed the first time through. What else do you have to know to make it work properly? And with that spirit, I think we can master Power Apps just like we've mastered Access. I hope you have enjoyed or learned something from today's session. If you have, I would appreciate it if you would hit the like button and also subscribe to my channel. Any feedback that you want to drop into the comments section is also more than welcome. Thanks, and I will see you next time as we resume our march through the development of in the creation of a development copy of Mike's mobile library. See you next time.